Hey guys, welcome back to Snake Limited. I'm John, and these two snakes here are very important for the video that we're talking about today. And that is, what exactly is a het? You guys probably hear it all the time. Some of you might have some sort of an idea of what it is, and some of you probably have absolutely no clue what it means. Especially because there's 50%, 66%, 100%, and it gets very confusing. So this is going to be part of my series. I started it like 2 years ago and I never really finished it. It's going to be ball python genetics for dummies, and this is going to be what is a het. So these two play a very important role in that as we're talking about it. But first I want to give a quick plug for my Patreon triple play event. If you haven't seen it, go check it out now. Everything in my store is listed at $9.99. When you buy one of those snakes, you get a $500 store credit gift card. You get a 1-year access to my Patreon. And you also get put into the raffle for my $10,000 banana urban camo snake, being raffled off completely for free if you take part in this. So once all the spots are filled, this is over and the raffle will happen. So take advantage of it while you can. I have a bunch of snakes still left in my store. All right, so this beautiful pair of snakes right here just had a 5-egg clutch that hatched. I don't know if you guys had seen it recently, but it has actually produced a lightning pied snake from these two snakes, which are not exanthic. A lightning pied is an MJ exanthic pied. So it's a beautiful snake. They're silvery black and white snakes, and these two snakes, which are not black and white, produced that snake. How did they produce it? Well, it's because they were pos het for MJ exanthic. And I'm going to put this female back. She's the prettier one, but she is, I'm trying to get her back on food. So she's going to be put away, and we'll just talk about dad for a little bit while we're talking about what hets are. All right, so when we're talking about hets, there's actually two different ways to look at it. The majority of genes in ball pythons are either recessive, which are genes such as pied, or clown, or sunset, or monsoon, or desert ghost. Those are all called recessive genes. There are also codominant genes, which are more scientifically referred to as incomplete dominant genes, but most people still call them codoms. That would be stuff like SNKE, orange dream, blackhead, leopard, Mojave, genes like that. The way I've looked at this, in the dummy way of looking at this, is there's heterozygous, which is what het means, and homozygous. Heterozygous means one copy of the gene. So that means just SNKE. That means just Mojave. That means just orange dream. Homozygous means there's two copies of the gene. So super SNKE, super Mojave, super orange dream. That's how it works in the codoms. It works a little bit differently in the recessives, but it basically still works the same exact way. When you say something is 100% het for pied, that means it's heterozygous for pied, meaning there's only one copy of the gene. The difference between a codom and a recessive gene is that a codom gene is visible when it's heterozygous, meaning there's only one copy. A homozygous form is required in a recessive gene for it to be visual. So this boy here, he's a visual recessive pied. That means he has two copies of the pied gene. So he is homozygous for pied, meaning he has two copies. I look at it like it's super pied, and that's the easy way to explain it to people. If you have super SNKE, you have two copies of the SNKE gene. If you're visual pied, you're super pied, meaning you have two copies of the pied gene. And that's how it is with all recessive genes. Clown, pied, sunset, monsoon, desert ghost, ultramel, on and on and on. You need two copies of that gene for you to be able to see it, for it to be visual. So that means both parents need to have one copy or two copies of that gene. And this is where all the different levels of het come into it. If you have two visual pieds, if you have a male and a female, and they're both visual pieds, they're both homozygous for pied, meaning they both carry two copies of the gene. When you carry two copies of that gene always gets passed along to the babies. So if dad is pied and mom is pied, all of the babies are pied because they're both visual pieds. They have 2 copies of the gene, and that gene always gets passed down. Because pied is recessive, it needs to have 2 copies of the gene for it to be visual, for you to see that it's pied. So if mom and dad both have 2 copies, they also both pass down 1 copy of that gene to their babies, so the babies all have 2 copies. That's why all of the babies are visual pieds. Dude's here trying to Blade. His name is Blade. He's trying to get into the plant behind us. So that's where I wanted to talk to you guys about the percentages, and this is where I think some people get a little bit more lost. When I bought this male and the female that I showed you in the beginning of the video, they were both sold to me as pied, visual pied, obviously, 100% het clown, which means they only carry 1 copy of the clown gene. So obviously, as you can see here, he's not a visual clown. And he was also 50% possible het for MJ Xanthic. So what does 50% possible het mean? What that means is one of his parents was 100% pos het MJ Xanthic. So his parent had 1 copy of the MJ Xanthic gene. So technically that parent is going to pass that gene down to roughly half of her babies. You don't know which 50% of her babies got that gene. And it's not exactly 50% all the time, but let's just stick with the percentage there. So half of her babies, if she had 4 babies, 2 of them would be het MJ Xanthic, 2 of them would not. In this case, he was sold to me as pos het MJ Xanthic 50%. That means 1 parent had MJ Xanthic, and that parent maybe it didn't pass along that gene to the babies. So there's no guarantee that this male was carrying the MJ Xanthic gene. The only way for me to figure that out is by shed testing, which we can't test for that gene yet in the US anyways, or through breeding. So I bred him to the female that I showed earlier in the video, which was also 50% pos het for MJ Xanthic. So they had their babies, the clutch hatched, and I hatched out a lightning pied. Now it's in shed, it should be shedding here in a day. Ow, there's a bite. At least he's feisty, jeez. So this is an MJ Xanthic lightning pied. This came out of him. So what that tells me is that this male carried the MJ Xanthic gene, so did the female. So this male and that female that were both 50% possible het for MJ Xanthic are now 100% MJ Xanthic. So that means that they both carry 1 copy of the gene. They are no longer 50% because it's proved out. If you happen to, I'm glad this snake is feisty because hopefully that means that it eats for me. The past couple snakes that I hatched that were super killer have been picky eaters. So hopefully this means that, he's a little more, she is a little bit better of an eater than the other ones. So he is now 100% het MJ Xanthic. He's no longer 50% because I've proved out that he has the MJ Xanthic gene by breeding this beautiful little feisty girl here. Now, if I didn't produce any lightning pieds out of this clutch, that wouldn't necessarily mean that he wasn't het for MJ Xanthic, because you can have bad odds. I've had 10 egg clutches this season where I had a 25% chance of hitting a clown pied, and I've hit 0. However, I've proved out the clown gene in those parents. So sometimes you just get bad odds. So unless you genetic test and you know for sure if an animal is or is not a het for a gene, it's kind of hard to disprove it unless you have, 100 eggs that come out of that snake and you don't get that gene. So now that I've proven out that these guys are both 100% het MJ Xanthic, they're no longer pos hets. They're no longer 50%. Now, you might also see 66%. And all that means is that you had two parents that were 100% het. And actually, this clutch is a good example. There were 5 eggs. Both parents are 100% het clown. I proved him out because he's produced clowns this year, so I know he's clown. I'm assuming the female is too because they came from the same place. And none of these babies were clowns in this clutch. So, because nothing in this clutch came out clown, all of the babies in this clutch are 66% het for clown. And they're also 66% het for MJ Xanthic, except for this one that's a visual. So what that means is, it's the same thing as 50%. It just means that you have a little bit better of a chance of it being clown, or in this place, MJ Xanthic. So 50% and 66% work exactly the same way. It just means that there's a little bit better odds in your favor with this 66%. So either way, if they're 50 or 66, if you prove that they are a het for whichever gene it is, MJ Xanthic, clown, pied, whatever, if you prove that gene out, whether they're 50 or 66, they turn into 100%. You drop the 50 or 66 and they turn into a 100% het for that specific gene. So it's not as complicated as you think it is. And the only difference between the codoms and the recessives is that you can see the codoms with either 1 or 2 copies of the gene, whether it's heterozygous or homozygous, meaning a super. Recessives don't work that way. If they're heterozygous, you can't see it. If they're homozygous, meaning 2 copies, you can see the gene. So this guy is homozygous for pied. His offspring was homozygous for pied and for MJ Xanthic. If they are 50% or 66% het, pied, MJ Xanthic, clown, whatever, it doesn't mean that half of the babies will come out with clown. It just means that there's a 50% shot that this snake carries the clown gene. Once you prove it out by breeding or through shed testing, the snake is no longer 50%, it's 100%. So hopefully that clears up the whole het thing for you. It's not as hard as it seems, but it can get confusing when you're just getting into the game. So you always really want to shoot to get 100% hets if you can. Some of the bigger genes, some of the harder combos, you really can't do anything other than get the 50% in there. But in this case, it actually worked out in my favor. I bought these 2 snakes. They're both Orange Dream and Blade. They were heterozygous for Orange Dream and Blade, meaning there's only 1 copy of those 2 genes, even though they're codoms. And they were both visual pieds, which means they were homozygous for pied. They were both 100% het clown, meaning that they only carry 1 copy of the clown gene. And they were both 50% het MJ Xanthic, which means there's only a 50% chance that both of these snakes actually carry that gene. Now that they produce that lightning pied baby, now they're both 100% het MJ Xanthic, meaning they both have 1 copy. So if I breed him to a visual lightning pied, which I'm actually going to be doing now, roughly half of the babies should come out and be lightning pieds. And same thing with the female. So I definitely lucked out with this clutch. Hopefully that helps out with your understanding of what a het actually is. The baby bit me, now he's trying to choke me out, so I guess these guys do not like me too much. But he's pretty. He's a good-looking snake. And the female's actually prettier, but she actually hasn't done a very good job getting back on food since laying. So, that's that. Those are the hets. If you have questions, comment down below. If you have bigger questions, take a look at my Patreon event or joining my Patreon. These are the sorts of things that I talk about all the time in there and at greater detail. So snakelimited.com or patreon.com/snakelimited, and I'll get all your questions answered.